In this presentation, you will learn about sexuality. The social study of sexuality includes the study of sexual behaviors and practices, sexual feelings, sexual orientation, and how specific sexual identities and behaviors are reinforced or discouraged by social institutions and cultures. Sexuality describes sexual identity, attraction, and experiences which may or may not be consistent with sex and gender. This includes heterosexuality, homosexuality, gay or lesbian, bisexuality, queer, and so on. Heterosexuality is usually considered as a norm. Anything in contrast to heterosexuality is considered to be deviant. Individuals who identify with role in contrast to their biological sex are referred to as transgender. For example, transgender men have such strong emotional and psychological connections to aspects of women in society that they identify as female. A parallel association with masculinity exists for transgender women. It is very difficult to determine the prevalence of gender transition in society. Transsexuals are those who alter their bodies with medical interventions to align their physical bodies with their gender identity. They may also be known as male to female or female to male transsexuals. However, not all transgendered individuals choose to alter their bodies. Many will maintain their original anatomy, but they may represent themselves to society as the opposite gender. This is typically done by adopting the dress, hairstyle, mannerisms, or other characteristics typically assigned to the opposite gender. It is important to note that cross-dressing is typically a form of self-expression, entertainment, or personal style, not necessarily an expression against one's assigned gender. Transgendered and transsexual individuals experience discrimination based on their gender identity. People who identify as transgendered are twice as likely to experience assault or discrimination as non-transgendered individuals. They are also 1.5 times more likely to experience intimidation. All members of LGBTQIA subgroups are subject to similar prejudices rooted in beliefs and traditions about sexuality and gender. LGBTQIA people, as members of a social minority group, are suffering from various forms of socio-economic and cultural injustice. Lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender people are more likely to experience intolerance, discrimination, harassment, and the threat of violence due to their sexual orientation than those that identify themselves as heterosexual. This is due to homophobia or the fear or hatred of homosexuality. Homophobia is reinforced on a larger scale due to the moral, religious, and political beliefs of a dominant group. In some countries, homosexuality is illegal and punishable by fines, imprisonment, life imprisonment, and even the death penalty. Heterosexuality should no longer be assumed. This assumption is called heterosexism. Although many societies have made significant strides in human rights advocacy, LGBTQIA rights struggle to find universal acceptance. The fact that the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, drafted in 1948, does not specifically include sexual orientation allows some people to consider LGBTQIA rights debatable. The Human Rights Declaration states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. Now, more and more people are openly expressing their sexual orientation and organizing and demanding their rights. Because of the work of these groups and their allies, acceptance of LGBTQIA rights around the world is growing, and governments in certain countries are beginning to legislate in favor of LGBTQIA rights and anti-discrimination laws. The major issues for LGBTQIA rights on a global scale in the future will be eradicating persecution based on sexual orientation, protection in the law from hate crimes and hate propaganda, equal rights and privileges like marriage, common law partnerships, medical decision making, wills and estates, parenting and adoption, and to work and educate others on homophobia and heterosexism by making the society more open to the changes and sensitizing them towards the issue. Concept of LGBTQIA. LGBT stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. LGBT is intended to emphasize a diversity of sexuality and gender identity based cultures and is sometimes used to refer to anyone who is non-heterosexual or non-cisgender instead of exclusively to people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. To recognize this inclusion, a popular variant adds the letter Q for those who identify as queer and or are questioning their sexual identity as LGBTQ recorded since 1996. Whether or not LGBT people openly identify themselves may depend on whether they live in a discriminatory environment as well as the status of LGBTQIA rights where one lives. The first widely used term, homosexual, was thought to carry negative connotations and tended to be replaced by homophile in the 1950s and 1960s and subsequently gay in the 1970s. Problems faced by LGBTQIA people. LGBTQIA people face tremendous difficulties growing up in a society where heterosexuality is the norm and homosexuality is regarded as deviant. They continue to face discrimination and exclusion across the world in the social, political, economic, and almost all spheres of life. Homophobic violence and abuse targeting LGBTQIA people occur on a regular basis. In most countries, same-sex couples do not enjoy the same rights and protections as opposite-sex couples and consequently suffer from discrimination and disadvantage in access to social protection schemes such as healthcare and pensions. In the labor market, a majority of LGBTQIA people continue to hide their sexual orientation or to endure harassment out of fear of losing their job. Particularly vulnerable are young LGBTQIA people who experience estrangement from family and friendship networks, harassment at school, and invisibility, which can lead in some cases to underachievement at school, school dropouts, mentally ill health, and homelessness. The International Journal for Interdisciplinary and Multidisciplinary Studies states that discrimination not only denies LGBTQIA people equal access to key social goods such as employment, healthcare, education, and housing, but it also marginalizes them in society and makes them one of the vulnerable groups who are at risk of becoming socially excluded. Thank you for watching the presentation. Do like, subscribe, share, and leave your comments about this presentation or any other topics you would like to learn more about.